Welcome to the Lakeville Public Library. We are Authors Without Borders, and we're doing a presentation on genre writing. This is Alberta Sequeira, Pat Perry, I'm Joyce Walsh. And I'm going to start off by talking about what is genre writing. And frequently you hear it disparaged as not serious writing. And we're going to debunk some of those ideas as we go along. There's actually genre writing applied to nonfiction, but such as cookbooks, it's a genre, spiritual writing. Some memoirs are genre and some are not. If they're historical or political, the I was there kind of personal experience memoir, that's not considered a genre. But if it's a personal life story or a celebrity tell-all, that's considered a genre. Who does this? This is the publishers mostly. But we're not going to talk about nonfiction, we're going to talk about fiction. And we're going, although there are many beautiful books and literature in other cultures, Middle Eastern cultures, Asian cultures, we're going to focus just on English language writing in Western civilization, English in translation. And fiction writing was divided right from the beginning. And it started, as most things did, with the Greeks. It was theater, and there was either comedy or tragedy. That was all they had. And you think of the musical, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. It's a tragedy tomorrow, comedy tonight. And that's the way it was for a very, very long time. And the comedy was meant to entertain, to make your audience laugh. Tragedy was to make you feel emotions and to think about things. And that division, that dichotomy persisted for a very, very long time. I'm going to read from a few notes here so I don't miss anything. It was the main genres, I guess we should start with that. The main genres, which are considered popular writing. It's crime, romance. Romance is by far the bestseller in the genre writing. Science fiction, horror, fantasy, and as I said, certain memoirs. Now, mystery writing really started off as crime and punishment. And it goes all the way back to the biblical story of Cain versus Abel. We're not going to talk about Eve and crime and punishment there, because that's another story altogether. But when Cain killed Abel, God divined what happened, and he meted out justice by excommunicating Cain. That formula of a crime, an investigation of sorts, and then justice is what has persisted even to now. But now it's not necessarily called crime and punishment. And the criminal has changed. Sometimes there's a very depth to the criminal, such as in Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov has a great deal of conflict in his thinking about committing the crime. And you get into the depths of that character. But think about authors who are writing in genres. In fantasy, J.K. Rowling, we all know the Harry Potter series, J.R.R. Tolkien, The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings. And these would hardly not be, who would call these not serious writers? They are popular. And sometimes popular is confused with genre. And it means the serious writing that some of these authors do. For example, Emily Bronte, Jane Austen, you would call those romance writers. In mystery writers, Stephen King, Agatha Christie, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. The Sherlock series is not anything that you would consider a meaningless genre. In movies and television, most of what you see, unless it's a game show or a reality show or documentary, it's going to fit into one of those categories. So what distinguishes genre in most people's minds? It's plot, for one thing. In romance, it used to be boy gets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl. And that was the formula, and vice versa. That's not any longer the case necessarily. Science fiction and fantasy kind of bridge, and they're two very distinct categories. But they bridge because there's mystery in there can be romance in there, and so now we're starting to see these lines kind of blur a little bit between the categories. The idea of the investigator in mysteries isn't that dissimilar to a scientific researcher. If you have a research grant, you've got what's called a principal investigator. there is a hypothesis, there's something to be solved. In fact, the first notable recorded epidemiological study was done in England by Sir John Snow, who, through research, found out that people were getting cholera and dying because of bacteria in the water in the town well and the town pump. And that was epidemiology in that regard, or scientific writing, scientific thinking, is solving a mystery of sorts. Perpetrators have evolved as well. There used to be something, there used to be the villain with the silent film mustache twisting villain. And those characters have changed greatly over time. In fact, most people want to make your villain or your perpetrator equal to your investigator, or sometimes smarter than. So it's a contest. So these genres are not so rigid anymore. And some of them can focus on outcome of the investigation. And think of To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. There was a crime supposedly committed, an investigation, a trial, an investigator, an outcome. Again, we're starting to blur these lines between what is genre and what is not genre. There are mysteries. In fact, there are so many mysteries and mystery thrillers now that there's actually a national organization, the Mystery Writers of America, devoted to novels of mystery. And our branch right here in New England is called Sisters in Crime. I've written 8 books, only one of which could technically be called mainstream. The rest are mysteries of sort or another, even my nonfiction. They're all set in New England. They all are focused really more on character and setting than plot. I mean, there has to be a plot. There has to be a crime to be considered a mystery. But it doesn't necessarily mean that's all you focus on. And good writing is good writing. It doesn't matter what genre it's in. Well, let me tell you, modern scholars think that the first mystery novels, this is actual novels, go back to Edgar Allan Poe in Murders in the Rue Morgue and Wilkie Collins, who wrote Moonstone. But that was in the 1800s. 1868 was Moonstone. I think there was something prior to that that would be considered a literary mystery. And I'll tell you the story. It's about this young man who's very close to his father. His father dies under suspicious circumstances. And the young man believes that his father was murdered. And he sets out to investigate what happened. And he uses a very complicated and unconventional way of revealing the murderer, who is his stepfather. So we have a crime, we have someone who is kind of a detective, we have the perpetrator, and we have justice because the perpetrator dies in the end. And what do you think that story is? It's Hamlet. Hamlet is a murder mystery, if you look at it that way, as I do. So there are mysteries all around us, and it's fun to think of just the book itself, the writing itself, the story itself, and forget about genres. And I think the fantasy genre, so-called, has the same kinds of issues. And I'm going to turn this over now to Pat Perry.
Hi, I'm Pat Perry. Fantasy is a genre of speculative fiction involving magical elements, typically set in a fictional universe, and sometimes inspired by mythology and folklore. Its roots are in oral traditions, which then became fantasy literature and drama. That's the basic definition of fantasy. Now, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of different categories. There are even more subcategories of fantasy. I would spend an hour and a half just listing all of them, but I am going to just touch upon a few of the most commonly known types of fantasy. Some of, as Joyce mentioned, J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote Lord of the Rings, J.K. Rowling, who wrote the Harry Potter series, George R.R. Martin, who wrote the Game of Thrones series, C.S. Lewis wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, and there are other many great writers. These are the most well-known types of fantasy because they've been turned into movies and also a TV series. So even if you are not a fan of fantasy, at least you've heard of it. And then maybe someone in your household was a Game of Thrones watcher, or somebody else, the Chronicles of Narnia. There's, I think, several of them. and they're on TV a lot. And they are geared more towards kids, early teens. They like that kind of a movie. The first Harry Potter book was Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. That was released in '97. And children and adults loved that movie. Then 6 more books were published, and then the first movie was released in 2001. Now, the kids that went to that first premiere are now parents, and they have shared their love of Hogwarts and Harry Potter and all of those with their kids. And the books are actually really timeless, so that when their kids grow up, they're also going to probably be drawn into that world. And that's just the great writing that J.K. Rowling had. I mean, I've never read the books. I've seen some of the movies, and it's just incredible how everything is magic. The pictures, the portraits on the walls, they come alive. The staircases move. The imagination of this woman is absolutely brilliant. The 2 broadest types of fantasy are high and low. High fantasies take place in settings that do not exist, like Narnia and Lord of the Rings. Low fantasies incorporate magical elements in the real world. For example, King Arthur might have been based on a real person, a warrior perhaps, but what morphs the tale of Arthur into fantasy is Merlin, the magician, Excalibur, and the Lady of the Lake, for example. Epic fantasy is a high fantasy. The range of this type of fantasy is broad and extensive, often requiring more than 1 book to tell the story. Multiple volumes will be required to fully weave the story together. The complexity of the story usually involves multiple groups or races where their survival depends upon banding together, usually against a common foe. Backstories are needed to identify the different groups because they are essential to the crux of the tale. The beliefs, the prejudices, perhaps past encounters of the different races could hinder or delay any potential alliance. Epic fantasies exist in the fictional lands, which can be as imaginative as James Cameron's Pandora from the movie Avatar, or basing your vision of a fantasy world on any place on Earth. Lord of the Rings, the cities and palaces are clearly very stunningly created, while many of the outdoor scenes were filmed in New Zealand. My trilogy is actually an epic fantasy. Dark fantasy can be either high or low. They incorporate gloomy, frightful, or disturbing components into the story. Stephen King's The Dark Tower is an example of this kind of fantasy. Historical fantasy inserts magical elements into historical timeframes, and they can also include things like vampires, ghosts, and other ghouls. If you mention Count Dracula, you immediately think of Transylvania. The place is real, and Vlad the Impaler lived hundreds of years ago, but he was the inspiration for Bram Stoker's Count Dracula. London, for example, a real place, was used as the backdrop for the movie An American Werewolf in London. So there are a lot of movies that you don't really think of as fantasy, but they really are. There's also, this is kind of a weird one, steampunk fantasy. It's considered a subgenre of science fiction because of the 19th century industrial steam-powered machinery technology. A good example of this is The Wild Wild West, which starred Will Smith. It was a Western, but they had all the gadgets and robots and things of that nature that were not known during this time frame, which happened to be the 1860s. Other types include fairy tale, comic, romantic, paranormal, grimdark, which is also a subgenre. It's a dystopian, dark, violent, becoming more popular kind of a fantasy, and an example of that would be Conan the Barbarian. Because in that, there's always, oh my God, nothing, we can't get out of this. This is a horrible situation, we're all gonna die kind of a thing. With any fiction novel, plot is very important. It has to draw the reader in. You have to have the reader engage in the story. You have to want them to turn page after page after page. In my opinion, characters, especially in fantasy, those are also very critical. Because for me, if I start reading a book and the characters are boring or they're bland, it just takes, I close the book, I'm done with it. So you have to be able to interact with the characters, whether you hate them, you want them to succeed, if they remind you of someone, do you hate the character? For me, it's about the character's soul. So you can have someone, and I do these twists in my book a lot, is that you have someone that initially comes out as being very helpful. They are nice, they're kind, but they're doing so because they have their own hidden agenda. And also, conversely, you have characters that come off as being real jerks, or they're greedy, or fill in the blank with any of that. But as time goes on with the people that they meet, they slowly turn inward and realize the mistakes that they've made. And they do come out and finally say, I was wrong, I was bad, I want to atone for my sins. And that's how that goes. But, you know, unless you're a fan of the genre, most people dismiss reading fantasies. And that's kind of a shame, because it's not all, for example, Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm not disparaging any of these. It's not hardcore in a lot of cases. With my books, it's more about the people, the challenges they face, the trials and errors and alliances, and that's the important thing, because people normally, in everyday life, they know people like this. Maybe not an elf, but they may know the characteristics behind that specific character. So, you know, I've had a lot of people that initially were, I don't want to buy it. They buy it, and then they come back to me at another event, for example. They're loving this. They're absolutely loving it, because with me, it's about the people. And the backdrop, I can be a little flowery with the backdrop, but it's important to the whole story or stories that the backdrop and the characters kind of interact, because for me, the characters are what drives the story forward.
You're very well.
Alberta?
Hello everyone, my name's Alberta Sikora. I ended up doing the genre of memoirs, but it wasn't really by choice. At the time, my father, who was a retired brigadier general in the Army, he was dying of cancer. So my 5 siblings and I went to South Dennis, and I don't know why, I took a pad of paper and a pencil with me, and every day I wrote down in a journal what happened with my father when he was dying. I wanted to leave behind for the family and future generations what my father meant during the war. My father also was one of the commanders for the 26th Yankee Division of New England. So I wrote a book called A Healing Heart. One advice I'd like to give to all authors: do something I didn't do. I never realized when you pick a title for your book, no matter what the genre is, go into Amazon, key it in. When I keyed in A Healing Heart, there was a ton of them. So that's not going to help you with people to find your book. I'm also very proud I do workshops, and I did them. The first one was right here at the Lakeville Library. And it was a wonderful turnout. And for people who couldn't be there, I also made up little tiny books. This one is on writing memoirs, which I'm going to talk about today. I have another one on how to get your book published. And also the last one, how to write with CreateSpace. They're all online under my name. You can get them. Memoirs belong in a different breed. You cannot lie writing a memoir. I don't know if you remember, pardon me, I can't think of his first name, Mr. Fry, that Oprah thought was so great, but A Little Million Pieces came the bestseller. I'm sure he made tons of money until they found out none in that book was true, very little. Now that hurt people, the authors who really wanted to write memoirs, because now the writers and readers are starting to think, how many memoirs are out there that aren't true? People want to make their book even more exciting. You can't do that. The second thing, and most important also, is you have to get permission from every person that you're going to have in your book. And I had to do that, and in my writing the memoirs, and also in my first book, which was writing about losing my first husband from alcohol abuse, I also have it in the beginning of this book. I'm going to read it to you for a minute. It's just something trying to protect yourself. Let me see. Sorry about that. The this book confirms that the contents of the books are her own perception. The situations are given as examples to help other alcoholics and their families. The events in this book may not have happened in the eyes of others. They may have looked at it in a different way. But no harm, embarrassment, slander, or other form of malice is intended. Some names have been changed for the privacy, and that was because some of them did not want to really have me write their names. Now, you may think your book, which I hope I'm wrong, is never going to go anywhere. If it does, you'd be surprised how these people are going to come out of the corners wanting, I wasn't that lucky though, to have people buying the book. And what I did under those paragraphs is I made lines. And I typed under the line the person's name, and they put their signature, and I put the date. You take that paper to the grave with you. You just never know when something's going to come out. If nobody wants to agree for you to use them, not as lucky as Joyce and Pat, you have to change everything about that person. If they're tall, you've got to make them short. If they're loaded with blonde hair, you've got to make them bald. Change their character completely, how they talk, everything about them you have to change. It's still taking a chance because you have no guarantee, but if you can get people to sign these, like I said, I've written up 4 books on my website with my workshops. My first book is A Healing Heart. It's sort of a spiritual book and a book about my father's death. How I came close to him during his death. To me, that was a gift from God. It's not a normal way to become close to your father, but I started looking at life different, and my father thought if he went to Medjugorje in Bosnia, where apparitions were happening, that he would be blessed. I didn't go till after his death, hoping I made the trip for him and myself. And there's nothing in that book. In fact, my brother even said to me, how did you remember all those details? But it was because I had the pen and pencil. I can't even tell you why I took that to be by my father when he was dying. After I wrote that, then I wanted to write about my first marriage to Richie Lopes. We lived in Dighton, and I really had trouble getting permission because his brother, wonderful man, Gilbert, who they called Sonny Lopes from the Lopes Construction Company on Winthrop Street in Taunton. My husband Richie was their younger brother. I became the biggest enabler. In my book that I write now, this is the first one about my husband. Someone stopped the merry-go-round. I would write what happened, and underneath it, then I would write what I would do today. We all wish we could go back somewhere in our life and change things, and I couldn't. I didn't really write this book for myself. I'm hoping, not just the alcoholic, other authors who want to write memoirs, give them ideas. This goes behind closed doors of my life. Nothing is hidden. Not sure who would approve of my writing of it, but I told the truth. Then what made it worse, I wrote the memoir, Please God Not To. It's about my daughter who followed the same path. I just want to get this cover. I'm not sure if Eric can get this. Please God Not To. My daughter followed the same path, and at 39, she died of alcohol abuse. Now, we all lose somebody. It doesn't matter what it's from, especially a child. Nothing could be more painful. But then I wanted to know, so I figured if I wanted to know, other people had wanted to know. So many questions. What could I have done better? Why is this death rate going up higher and higher? Why can't doctors and counselors? What does the substance abuser need? I did a research online. And this book is called What Is and What Isn't Working for the Alcoholic and Addict. I did research with 34 alcoholic and drug users from America and from Canada. I'm hoping this would become a fantastic book. Right now, I may be writing this book over again, and it might be the mindset of an alcoholic and addict. Because I got more lessons of things I could have done better, but these people were very honest. Some girls at the age of 3 started drinking, would you believe that? They loved the parties the parents had, and after they left, they'd go and collect all the cherries that were soaking in the liquor glasses and like the feeling it gave them. I'm hoping for this to be a good book for the libraries, for schools. All I can do really is talk about it and advertise it. As the 3 of us know, writing is fun, but it's the promoting. You have to be at the right place at the right time with the right person. But I do want to give advice to authors. I found this site. It's not really a site. It's a telephone marketing. It's called. It's with Stephen Harrison. Sorry, my mind went blank. Stephen Harrison. Go on his site. Sign up. He tells you who's going to be on, and all you do is dial that number and you listen. And I heard one thing that really made me go further with my writing. He had someone on talking who was a poor author and who was a rich author. Well, of course, we all want to be rich. We're still waiting. But a poor author is someone who's excited to get their books in the libraries, they're on the shelves of bookstores, they're hoping, which Pat knows because I made a remark once too, you're hoping for Amazon and Barnes & Noble to do the marketing for you. You're going to sit back and collect all the money. It doesn't happen that way. You have to face reality also with writing. That's a poor author. A rich author, they say, what else can I do? And I thought about it. So I started doing workshops. I was nervous. I was so nervous talking in front of people. Like I said, my first workshop was here, went well. I've been to the jail in Dartmouth and I've talked to the men and women inmates. I get great satisfaction in that. I did that with Sheriff Hodgson, and I'm hoping with the new sheriff that I might be able to contribute my time there. They bought my alcoholic books to pass out in the library, and it turned out all the men, when I was talking to them, grabbed all the books that they weren't supposed to and wanted me to sign it. Now they had to give it to the men. I really love trying to give hope to alcoholics and their families. Memoirs are another thing that sort of hurts authors and you get heartbroken because publishers, I don't think you take you seriously. Most publishers look at someone writing a memoir as someone writing about their family life. They want to make money. So what they do is they want a book that's going to sell, not just to family or friends.
And self-publishing has changed the game completely.
Yeah. Yes.
There's so many voices out there now,
Oh, yeah.
so many writers, so much competition, that it's hard to find your own niche and find an audience.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult. It's more difficult now than it used to be.
Yeah, it is. It can be fun, but you also have to face the reality. There's a lot of work to get your book out there. But if any of you have problems, questions, our websites are up there. We have our emails. Please, we'll answer any questions you have.
Pat, do you want to give the website?
Our website is www.authorswithoutborders.com. And I do want to mention something real quick. Alberta's right. For me personally, the writing part, it's a work of love. It allows me actually to mentally escape when I do write, because I'm actually in the story, not as a character, but I'm away from everything else. Promotional, it's unless you have the right publisher or agent or something, that's the hardest thing. And I always say that the writing is the fun part. The rest of it is really hard.
And something else, writers get to know the authors, mystery, fantasy, memoirs. You can change your genre, which I did. A couple of months ago, I wrote my first romance book called The Rusty Years. It's a 2-book series, and it happens from Bonn all the way down to Provincetown. It's got a lot of twists and turns in it, but I think it's a very good book if somebody really is looking for something to reminisce. Of course, I have a lot of different things in there about the Great Depression, but you know, when it's time for buying gifts for Christmas, especially if you have nieces and nephews, I really have to say, Pat's books are fantastic. No one thinks of throwing in a little book. You'd be surprised how 10-year-olds and up, when we go to some signings, they're all over Pat, wondering if she's got a new book out. You have a husband, you have a brother-in-law, you have a brother. Joyce has wonderful mysteries. It takes you away from, especially the stress we have in this world today. And my books can do the same, so I hope everybody hits on our sites and see what we have to offer.
And we have one member of our group of Authors Without Borders who isn't here today. She had to be elsewhere, who's a poet and a short story writer. And our website will take you into each of our own websites if you want to learn more. Our mission as Authors with Borders started out in 2007, so we've been together for quite a long time. And our goal was to help aspiring writers journey through this writing process into publishing, and perhaps tell them some of the mistakes that we've made and what to do and how to do it. We've shepherded quite a few authors to publication, and we're very proud of that. We've done collective workshops, we've done presentations. We've been sponsored here for a presentation some years ago by the Local Arts Council. So we have always been engaged in helping other writers and continue to do so. So thank you very much.
Yeah, the only thing is, we wish that we had somebody that would guide us. And this is one of the reasons why we just tally up our mistakes or whatever it might be. And it's like, all right, I did this and I shouldn't have done that, but there was no one there to tell me. At least we give people the information. And you know, when I had my first book published, it was like, oh my God, I have a book, I have a book.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
I went through a publishing company that I personally had no problems with, but I found out later on that the fantasy groups were not happy with the publishing company. So even though I received great reviews, a lot of the conventional fantasy fans, they would not buy my book because they were against the company that I initially had my book published with. So again, there's little things like that, there's big things like that, and
There are a lot of pitfalls.
so yeah, we try to help people as much as we can. Maybe that's what our actual reason to write is, not just to entertain people with our books, but to steer them at least away from some of, as Joyce mentioned, the pitfalls. So you can contact us and
We'll try to help.
we'll try to help.